Hello friends, welcome to another Life History channel. I hope you're ready for sleep, because tonight I'm taking you on quite a long journey into the depths of Central America's lush rainforests, toward the traces of a civilization that time forgot but could never completely erase. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine that you're walking through a dense forest stretching for kilometers. You're surrounded on all sides by giant trees and vines. Beneath your feet is damp earth. In your ears the cries of birds and the howling of monkeys. Then suddenly a stone corner emerges from between the giant leaves. As you approach, you see this is no ordinary rock. It's a monument touched, carved, and shaped by human hands. And then, as your eyes adjust, you realize that every green hill around you is actually a pyramid. Every turtle-back-like mound is a temple. It's as if the forest has swallowed a city but couldn't digest it. This was exactly the scene that existed for centuries in Central America. There were massive stone pyramids, plazas wrapped in tree roots, temples reaching toward the sky above the forest canopy, but no one saw them, or those who saw them, no one believed them. These were the remains of the classic Maya civilization. And friends, what a civilization it was. Consider that in world history, only a few civilizations have developed a true writing system. The Chinese did it, the Mesopotamians did it, the Egyptians did it, and the Maya did it. They were the only people on the American continent to accomplish this. They didn't just write, they were mathematical geniuses. They discovered the concept of zero, which even the Roman Empire couldn't do. Think about that. Their astronomical knowledge was so advanced that they could predict the movements of the stars even 1,000 years into the future. They created a calendar system that was as precise as our modern calendar today. So what happened to all this magnificent civilization? This is where the real mystery begins. Because in the 8th and 9th centuries, almost overnight, these great cities began to empty. Pyramids were left unfinished. Temples were abandoned. Plazas fell silent. It was as if someone had pressed a giant button and shut down the entire civilization. Why? To search for the answer to this question, tonight we'll work together like detectives. We'll examine one by one the clues hidden in the soil, in stone, even in the mud at the bottom of lakes. We'll try to understand the perfect storm created by wars, droughts, and environmental disasters. But before that, I have a small request. I recently underwent surgery, and despite this, I'm working extra hard to bring you this content. If you enjoy this type of content, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. This is really very simple, but creates very valuable support for me. Also, definitely write in the comments, where in the world are you watching from and what time is it there? Being part of this global community excites me every time. Now, settle comfortably into your seat. Maybe get some tea or coffee. Set aside the noise of the modern world, because now we're journeying into the depths of time, into the mysterious world of silent cities. For centuries, these magnificent Maya cities slept. They hid in the forest's green arms, dreaming their dreams. To the outside world, it was as if they had never existed. Occasionally, strange rumors came from the local people. There were strange stone statues in the forest. There were massive ruined buildings. But who would take these seriously? For European scientists of that era, the idea of an advanced civilization in America was ridiculous anyway. Native peoples can't do such things, they said. If such ruins really exist, they must have been made by the ancient Egyptians, or by one of Israel's lost tribes. But Native Americans? Never. It's at this exact point that two extraordinary men enter the scene. One is John Lloyd Stevens, an American lawyer, diplomat, and traveler. A curious person, an adventurer, someone who wanted to see the world. The other is Frederick Catherwood, an English architect and painter, a man with extraordinary drawing talent whose obsession with detail made him one of the best technical artists of his time. The year 1839. These two men, captivated by the rumors they've heard, set out for the forests of what is now Honduras and Guatemala. But friends, this is no ordinary trip. This journey is a complete nightmare. Imagine a dense, humid, suffocating rainforest. No maps, no roads. You're advancing with mules. You're carrying dozens of kilos of equipment on you. You're covered in insect bites. You're sinking into mud. A downpour begins, stops hours later, then starts again. Your clothes never dry. Everything is moldy, damp, humid. On top of this, the region is in the heart of political chaos. There's civil war, armed groups at every corner. Stevens and Catherwood are repeatedly stopped at gunpoint, interrogated. Who are you? What's your business here? Are you spying? But they don't give up. They found a local guide. They're following him. They walk for days, and one day near the Copan River in Honduras, the guide stops and points in a direction. Stevens and Catherwood begin clearing the brush with machetes. They advance, and then they emerge into a clearing. What they see, friends, is a truly history-changing moment. Before them, rising from the forest floor, are massive stone monuments. Stelae, stone pillars, each carved from top to bottom in incredible detail. There are portraits of kings on them. There are strange geometric symbols. There's a writing system they've never seen before. Catherwood, as an architect, is shocked when he sees the quality of these carvings. This, he says, this is the work of a culture as sophisticated as Egypt, as Greece. But the one who realizes what's truly important is Stevens. Because Stevens understands this. This is not the work of foreigners from another continent. This is the work of a Native American civilization, the remains of a completely forgotten, completely unique but incredibly powerful civilization. He becomes so convinced of its importance that he goes and buys the entire lost city. Yes, you heard that right. He pays the bewildered local landowner $50 and says, "This is mine now." Think how funny that is in today's money. Buying a massive ancient city for $50. This is where the second hero comes into play. Catherwood and his magnificent talent. Imagine his hands are swollen from insect bites. He's overwhelmed by the heat, but he has a special tool in his hand. They call it a camera lucida, a type of projection device. With this tool he can project the image of the carvings before him onto his paper and draw them with incredible accuracy. For hours, for days, he works, recording every detail, because he knows these drawings must not be romantic fantasies. These must be scientific records. They will be the first real Maya images that humanity will see, and their journey continues. The next discovery, Palenque in Mexico. In the misty depths of the forest, an elegant multi-story palace emerges. There are stucco reliefs on the walls, delicate, detailed, magnificent. Then they arrive at Tikal, in Guatemala, and what they see here takes their breath away. The tallest pyramids in America are rising toward the sky. They're so tall that their peaks pierce through the green blanket of the rainforest. They can be seen from kilometers away. In 1841, Stevens publishes his book Incidents of Travel in Central America, Chiapas and Yucatan, filled with Catherwood's breathtaking drawings. And this book, friends, creates a truly bombshell effect. The world is shocked, because now no one can deny it. Long before Columbus came to America, there was a great, sophisticated, magnificent civilization here. It rose, lived through a brilliant golden age, and then mysteriously collapsed. The silent cities had been found. The world now knew they existed, but now deeper, more disturbing questions were emerging. Who built these magnificent cities? What kind of society lived here? Which gods did they worship? What kind of science did they develop? And most importantly, why did they leave? Why did they abandon these perfect cities to the forest? Finding the answers to these questions would take centuries, and the story that emerged would be far more complex, far more tragic, and far more fascinating than you could imagine. In the years following Stevens and Catherwood's discoveries, archaeologists began to delve into the Maya world, and the picture that emerged was richer and more complex than could ever be imagined. First, it's very important to understand this. The Maya were not a single empire. Don't imagine a giant state ruled from a single capital like Rome, like China. No, the Maya world was something far more dynamic, far more complex. Imagine that there are dozens of independent city-states. Each has its own king, its own army, its own gods. Sometimes they form alliances. Sometimes they tear each other apart. They establish bonds through royal marriages. Then they wage war. A constantly changing, vibrant, dynamic political landscape. We say Tikal, for example, a giant power. Palenque, the center of art and culture. Calakmul, they call it the Snake Kingdom. Powerful, dangerous. Copan, the city of carving masters. All of these are rivals, all competing for power, all trying to say I am the greatest. And do you know what the foundation of this entire civilization rests on? A single plant, a single crop, corn. The Maya were corn people, friends. Really, this wasn't just a food source for them. This was their religion, their identity, the center of their existence. What did they tell in their creation myths? That the gods created humans from corn, that the first humans were kneaded from corn dough, so they were literally saying, we are corn. But growing corn in a tropical rainforest is not an easy task. The soil is thin, rainfall is unpredictable. That's why the Maya developed incredible agricultural techniques. They practiced slash and burn agriculture. They would clear a small forest patch, burn it, the ash becoming nutrients. They'd use that field for a few years, then leave it to let the soil rest and move to another place. They built terraces on slopes, creating flat areas, preventing soil erosion. In swamps, they made raised fields. They call it Chintampa, islands of fertile soil surrounded by water channels, constant irrigation, constant harvest. But all these efforts weren't just a technical matter. No, this was a sacred drama. This is where we come to the most fascinating and perhaps most dangerous aspect of Maya civilization, the divine kingship system. Do you know what they called the Maya king? Kuhulajo. It means sacred lord, but this isn't just a title. This is literally a mission definition. The Maya king was not an ordinary ruler. He was a shaman. He was the bridge between the human world and the world of the gods. He was the chief intermediary, the only person who could go back and forth between the two realms. And what would this king do? His duty wasn't just commanding armies, passing laws, collecting taxes. No, his real duty lay much deeper, maintaining the order of the universe. Think about this. Ensuring the sun rises every day, continuing the phases of the moon, and most importantly, most vitally, bringing the rains, because without rain, corn doesn't grow. If corn doesn't grow, the people starve. If the people starve, civilization collapses. So the king's sacred duty was, in the truest sense, ensuring the survival of society. So how would he do this? This is where things get truly chilling. The king's most powerful offering was his own blood. Yes, you heard that right. His own blood. Imagine it. A great ceremony. Thousands of people gathered in the plaza. The king at the top of the pyramid. In his hand, an obsidian lancet. A knife made of volcanic glass, extremely sharp, or a stingray spine. or a sharpened bone fragment, and the king, before the eyes of the gods and his people, pierces his own tongue, or his earlobes, or other sensitive parts of his body. Blood drips, flowing onto paper strips. These papers are collected in a bowl. Then these blood-soaked papers are burned. Smoke rises to the sky, and according to Maya belief, a door opens in this smoke. The vision serpent is summoned, a portal through which the king can speak with the gods, with the ancestors. From here, from this painful ritual, the king presents his petition to the gods. Send rain, feed my people, grow the corn. This, friends, was the great cosmic bargain at the heart of Maya civilization. The people fed the king. They gave tribute from cornfields, built pyramids, provided soldiers for the army. The king fed the gods with his own sacred blood, with his rituals, with his ceremonies. The gods fed the universe. They sent rain, made the sun rise, kept the cosmos in balance. As long as this wheel turned, everything was fine. Cities grew, the people were happy, corn swayed in the fields. But what if this wheel stopped? What if the gods didn't answer? What if the rains didn't come? That's when the entire system would begin to collapse, because the king's legitimacy rested on a single promise. I can speak with the gods. I can bring the rain. As long as this promise was kept, there was no problem. But if it became impossible to keep, for now, keep this detail in a corner of your mind, because this will be critical to understanding the collapse. For decades, for centuries, archaeologists looked at Maya remains and couldn't understand what they were seeing. Everywhere there were complex carvings, on stelae, on pyramid walls, on temple columns. Everything was covered with these mysterious symbols. But what did they mean? Most scientists thought this. These are just decorations, artistic pictures, maybe some religious symbols, but they can't be a real writing system. They were wrong, very wrong, because hidden within these glyphs was the only complete writing system developed in ancient America. Maya writing was an incredibly sophisticated system. It wasn't simple like our alphabet. It was much more complex, much richer. Some glyphs represented complete words, like logos, a glyph for king, a glyph for blood, a glyph for war. Some glyphs were phonetic. You read them syllable by syllable, just like in Japanese. And the wonderful part was this. They could write the same word in different ways, sometimes with a logo glyph, sometimes spelling it out syllable by syllable. This gave scribes incredible artistic freedom. You read texts in a zigzag pattern, left to right, top to bottom, in paired columns. Each glyph block was a work of art in itself, but do you know what the foundation of all this was? Mathematics. An incredibly advanced mathematics system. The Maya developed a base 20 number system. Why 20? Because the total number of fingers on hands and feet is 20, 1.1, 1 bar 5, and most importantly, a stylized shell, 0, 0, 0. Friends, the Maya independently discovered 0. The Roman Empire never did this. In medieval Europe there was no 0, but the Maya had it. What does this mean? They could make calculations reaching into the millions. They could track the massive cycles of time. They could make astronomical calculations. And now we come to perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Maya civilization, their obsession with time. For the Maya, time was a sacred thing. It wasn't linear, it was cyclical. Everything repeated. Creation, destruction, recreation, endless cycles. And to track these cycles they developed an incredibly complex calendar system. Not just one calendar, multiple interlocking calendars. The first Tzolk'in, the 2060-day sacred calendar, used for religious ceremonies, for prophecies. Each day had a sacred meaning, a character. The second Harb, the 365-day solar calendar, for agricultural seasons, when to plant crops, when to harvest. These two worked together like giant gears, and every 52 years the same combination would repeat. For the Maya, 52 years was a special cycle, but these weren't enough. They wanted to track larger cycles. For this they created the long count. The long count kept track of the number of days since the mythical creation date 3114 BC. Linear, accurate, precise. Today archaeologists date Maya events down to the exact day, thanks to this, and astronomy. We can't pass without talking about astronomy. They built observatories atop pyramids. From here, priest astronomers watched the sky, patiently for years, for decades. They could predict solar eclipses. They could predict lunar eclipses. They knew Venus's cycles, one cycle every 584 days, and Venus was very important to them. It was associated with the war god. All this knowledge, glyphs, mathematics, calendars, astronomy, served a single purpose: understanding how the universe works, solving the cosmos. The Maya didn't see the universe as a chaotic place, quite the opposite. They saw it as a massive, complex but predictable machine, and if you could fully understand how this machine worked, if you could synchronize your society with its rhythm, then everything would be perfect. The universe for them was a text, written in the language of the stars, and they were the readers of this text. Around AD 750, the Maya world was at its peak. Population had reached its highest level, perhaps 10 to 15 million people. Cities were thriving. More than 60,000 people lived in Tikal. Art and science were flourishing. Everything was perfect. Everything seemed like it would continue this way forever. But it didn't, because now, friends, we're coming to the darkest part of the story, the time of collapse, the days when the last monuments were erected, the last writings carved, the last rituals performed, and then silence, death. Now let me show you something. An anomaly, a disruption, so clear in history that we could only notice it thanks to modern archaeology. For centuries, Maya kings maintained a tradition. They recorded important events on stone monuments. Did they win a victory? A stela is erected. The date is carved. Is a new temple being opened? Stela. Is a prince being born? Stela. Has an alliance been formed? Stela. Thanks to this obsessive record-keeping, today we know Maya history with incredible accuracy. Thanks to precise long-count calendars, we can tell which king lived when, which war happened when, down to the exact day. But it's precisely this accuracy that also makes the disaster visible. Toward the end of the 8th century, something starts to go wrong. Cities fall silent one by one. What does this mean? The last dated monuments are no longer being erected. Last dated monument in Palenque, AD 799. Then nothing. Last dated monument in Copan, AD 822. Then nothing. Tikal, that magnificent superpower city, last great monument, AD 869. Then nothing. This can't just be coincidence, friends. A tradition that lasted for centuries suddenly stops. Kings are no longer commissioning these public declarations. Why? There are two possibilities. Either they can no longer do it, resources are exhausted, there are no craftsmen, society is collapsing, or they no longer want to. The system itself is being questioned. The king's authority is eroding. In both cases, the result is the same. A silent but clear indication of a deep crisis. But the evidence doesn't stop there. There are more disturbing things. Archaeologists digging found something strange. Massive construction projects, but left unfinished. Imagine a new temple is being built. The foundation has been laid. Some walls have risen. Complex carved stone blocks have been prepared. But then, everything has stopped. There are large plazas, only half paved. There are temple staircases, cut off in the middle. In stone quarries, there are processed but never used blocks. On roadsides, there are abandoned heavy stones. It's as if one day everyone put down their tools and left. Construction sites turned into ghost towns. What does this mean? The engine of Maya civilization was coming to a halt. Master craftsmen were leaving. Resources were being depleted. Organization was dissolving. But perhaps the most unsettling evidence is this: walls. You know, throughout the classic period, Maya cities were open. There were no walls because warfare was ritualized, controlled. There was no need to defend the city itself. But in the final years this changes. We see hastily built defensive walls around the central areas of cities. Crude, unplanned, desperate walls. This is the complete opposite of the previous confident design. This is a sign of a world suddenly living in fear, and the quality of luxury goods is declining. Pottery is cruder, carvings are simpler, jade ornaments are decreasing. Why? Because trade networks are collapsing. Merchants bringing goods from distant regions are no longer on the roads. Master craftsmen are declining, dying, migrating. What do all these tell us? For the last century and a half, the great ancient cities in the southern lowlands were slowly dying. Their people were leaving. Some were migrating to northern cities. Some were dispersing into the depths of the forest. Some were dying from hunger, disease, violence. Over approximately 150 years, a civilization that had stood for more than 600 years melted away. But why? That's the real question. What happened? The first major theory: escalating violence. War was an integral part of Maya civilization. We know that, but mostly it was ritualized, limited. The goal of classic Maya warfare generally wasn't to conquer territory. It wasn't to annihilate the enemy population. The goal was to capture the king and high-ranking nobles. These captives would be taken to the victor's city. There they would be humiliated before the people. They would be tortured, and ultimately they would be sacrificed in great ceremonies. Terrible, yes, but controlled. A system with certain rules. However, in the collapse period this begins to change. The evidence shows this very clearly. Art becomes more somber, more chaotic, more hopeless. The famous murals at Bonampak, for example, they show a brutal battle scene, armies clashing in the forest, masked warriors, jaguar skins, feathered headdresses, and then a horrific scene. The fingernails of captured prisoners are being pulled out. They're waiting to be sacrificed. The images on stelae also change. Previously, usually the capture of a single enemy lord would be shown, but now we see dozens of captives, bound, wretched, hopeless, and there's evidence in the ground too. Archaeologists are finding mass graves bearing the marks of violent death, not just a few elites, dozens, hundreds of people. The most detailed picture comes from the Pitexpatun region of Guatemala. In the city of Dos Pilas, there's a royal dynasty. They're pursuing an aggressive policy. They're attacking their neighbors, gaining territory, building a small empire. For a while it works. They're successful. But then the backlash begins. They're being attacked. They're getting retaliation. And this creates a death spiral. Constant war, endless conflict, a frenzy of violence that exhausts the entire region. The final capital, Aguateca, is abandoned so quickly that meals are left half-eaten in kitchens. Valuable possessions are left on house floors. A moment of complete chaos. This is the first theory. The ritualized warfare system that worked for centuries is spiraling out of control. Why is it spiraling out of control? Maybe resources are declining and competition is intensifying. Maybe after a series of bad harvests, cities are becoming desperate. Maybe a leader makes a mistake and a wave of retaliation begins. Whatever the reason, the result is disastrous. Constant warfare keeps farmers away from their fields. Crops remain unsown. Harvests can't be done. Famine begins. Trade routes break down. Salt, obsidian, luxury goods can't be transported. The economy collapses. And most importantly, the people's faith in kings is shaken. You can't protect us, they say. Your gods aren't helping us. Your rituals aren't working. The foundations of the divine kingship system begin to crack. But is war alone a sufficient explanation? No, because it doesn't answer a deeper question. Why did warfare escalate? And this is where the second major theory comes into play. This theory is much more disturbing, because it says the Maya prepared their own end, their own success killed them. How? Tropical rainforests are deceptive friends. Looking from outside, you see endless fertility. Everything is lush green, alive, abundant. But the reality is completely different. The soil of the rainforest is incredibly thin. Nutrient values are low. It depletes easily. Why? Because the forest's main nutrient cycle doesn't happen in the soil, but above, in the trees, in the leaves. Giant trees absorb nutrients with their roots, use them in leaves, leaves fall, decay quickly, are absorbed again, a closed loop. The moment you cut down the trees, this cycle breaks. The soil is exposed to sun and rain. Nutrients are washed away. After a few years, the soil becomes like sand. Nothing grows. The Maya knew this. That's why they practiced slash-and-burn agriculture. They gave the soil rest periods. But as the population increased, this system collapsed. Imagine, in the 8th century, the population is at its peak. Maybe 15 million people. In a single city like Tikal, 60,000 people. To feed these people, what's needed? Massive cornfields. And for these fields, what's needed? Cutting down the forest. But it's not just food. The second and perhaps bigger demand, architecture. Remember, Maya pyramids weren't bare stone. They were covered with bright white lime plaster. To make this plaster, what do you need to do? You extract limestone. Then you burn it at very high temperatures. What do you burn it with? Wood. Massive amounts of wood. When archaeologists did the calculations, they were shocked. To produce lime plaster for just one of the Great Pyramids in Tikal requires cutting down approximately 1,000 acres of forest. 1,000 acres for one pyramid. And how many pyramids are there in Tikal? Dozens. And there are rival kings. They're competing with each other. My temple will be bigger. Mine will be brighter. Mine will be taller. A kind of architectural arms race. And each new pyramid means thousands of trees being cut down. What was the result? The landscape around the great cities slowly changed. Dense forest gave way to a mosaic of patchy agricultural areas and bare slopes. And this widespread deforestation triggered a chain of disasters. Soil erosion, without the root system of trees. Rain swept away the topsoil, carried it to rivers, to lakes. Agricultural productivity fell. Climate change. When the forest disappeared, moisture released into the atmosphere decreased. Dry seasons became longer and more severe. Resource loss. The forest isn't just trees. Game animals, medicinal plants, building materials, firewood, all gone. Where does the evidence come from? From lake bottoms. Scientists drill into the bottoms of lakes in the region. They extract layers of mud, and in this mud they find ancient pollen grains. They do pollen analysis, and what do they see? In the layers corresponding to the late Classic period, tree pollen drops dramatically, wild grass pollen explodes. This is the clear signature of widespread deforestation. At the same time, sediment layers thicken. Why? Because soil washing down from the hills is increasing. The distinguishing features of the Mayas' own success. Large population, magnificent white cities were also the seeds of their downfall. They pushed their fragile tropical environment beyond the breaking point. They created a system with no margin for error, a civilization living on a knife's edge. They inflicted a heavy wound on themselves, left it defenseless. But to find the ultimate fatal blow, we must look to the sky. For many years, the theory that drought killed the Maya was just speculation. Evidence was scarce. Most scientists were skeptical. But in recent years, everything changed. A new generation of scientists, working like history detectives, discovered nature's secret archives. They learned to read climate records thousands of years old. How? The first method: lakebed sediments. They go to lakes in the Yucatan Peninsula. They insert long metal tubes into the lake bottom. They extract deep mud cores. These mud layers are like history books. The bottom ones are the oldest, the top ones the newest, and in these layers they measure gypsum. What is gypsum? Calcium sulfate. In dry periods it precipitates in water in greater quantities. So by looking at gypsum concentration you can tell how dry that year was. The second and more precise method: cave formations. The underground of Yucatan is full of giant caves, and in these caves water dripping from the ceiling for thousands of years has formed massive formations, like a tree's rings. These formations also grow layer by layer. Each layer corresponds to a time period, and scientists analyze oxygen isotopes trapped in these layers. From these isotopes they can understand rainfall amounts, air temperature, humidity levels. They can reconstruct ancient weather patterns with almost monthly accuracy, and when these two independent records are combined, they tell the same story. The classic Maya growth period, AD 300-600, exceptionally high and reliable rainfall. During this fortunate climate period, the population exploded, cities grew, civilization reached its peak. The collapse period AD 750-900, a century-long severe drought, occasional megadroughts, terrible dry periods lasting decades. Friends, stop for a moment and think about what this means. For centuries, everything had been fine. Rains were coming, corn was growing, people were fed, kings were strong. Then the sky changed. Rains decreased. First a little, then more. Then they almost stopped coming altogether. The impact would be apocalyptic. Imagine it. You're in Tikal. The year is AD 850. Population 60,000. You're looking at the great water reservoirs that are the city's pride. For years these reservoirs filled up. When the rainy season came, they overflowed. In the dry season they provided water to the city. But this year is different. The rainy season came, but the rain didn't. The reservoirs didn't fill. Yes, no problem, you say. There's water left over from last year. 1 year passes. Again little rain. 2 years pass. Reservoirs have dropped to half. 3 years pass. Water levels are dangerously low. 5 years pass. Most reservoirs have dried up. Only cracked dry mud remains. And now what will happen? Water problems begin. People are fighting over the remaining water sources. Diseases are spreading. But worse, corn. Without rain, corn doesn't grow. The first year the harvest is bad. Yes, we have stores, you say. Second year, bad again. Stores are declining. Third year, stores are almost empty. Fourth, fifth year. Now hunger is beginning. Real hunger. Children are malnourished. They catch diseases more easily. The death rate is increasing. Adults are getting weak. They can't work. They can't build pyramids. They can't plow fields. The forest is drying the sacred cenote wells. Those deep natural water pools are beginning to dry up. And now the greatest catastrophe. A city of 60,000 people is turning into a death trap. Because what can you do? You want to migrate. But where? The drought isn't just affecting your city. It's affecting the entire region. Neighboring cities are in the same situation. They're also hungry. They won't accept you. They might even attack. And here the divine kingship system begins to collapse. Remember, what was the king's entire power based on? I can speak with the gods. I can bring the rain. Right here, in these terrible drought years, imagine the king's situation. At the top of the pyramid, a great ceremony. Thousands of hunger-stricken people in the plaza. The king is performing the bloodletting ritual. He's suffering. His blood is flowing. Papers are being burned. Smoke is rising. Oh gods, send rain. My people are dying. But the sky is silent. No clouds, no rain. A month later, the same ceremony again. The same prayer again. The same silence again. A year later, still no rain. 2 years later, still no rain. What do the people start thinking? The king's rituals aren't working. The gods aren't listening to him. Maybe he's not a real sacred lord. Maybe the gods are angry and hate us. Or maybe there are no gods at all. This last thought is especially dangerous because the entire social structure is built on belief in the gods. The king's legitimacy begins to erode. People aren't obeying. They're not paying taxes. They're not building pyramids. And what does the king do? Desperately trying new rituals, shedding more blood, maybe increasing human sacrifices, but nothing works. The sky remains silent. And now, friends, all the pieces are falling into place. The Maya collapse didn't happen from a single cause. It was a perfect storm. The domino effect of interconnected crises. The foundations were laid over centuries. Excessive population growth. Massive pressure on the environment. No margin for error remained. Widespread deforestation. Soil erosion. Local climate change. Resource loss. Increasing competition. Kings competing with each other. Bigger pyramids. More resource consumption. The system became fragile. They were already on the edge of a cliff. Then came the trigger. Megadrought. A disastrous climate change beginning around AD 750. Lasting for centuries. The rain stopped. Corn didn't grow. Hunger began. And this hunger triggered a series of reactions. Escalating warfare. What did kings do? They fought to seize the remaining resources. But this war was no longer ritualized. This was a war of survival. Ruthless, total war. War did these things, kept farmers away from their fields. Famine got even worse, destroyed trade routes. Economy collapse, created terror. People locked themselves behind walls. Productive output stopped. Loss of faith. Most importantly, the people's faith in kings and gods collapsed. The king's rituals failed. Rain didn't come. People died of hunger. War only brought more suffering. The entire divine kingship system turned into a lie, and this created a feedback loop. Drought, famine, war, more famine, more war, loss of faith, system collapse, migration, cities emptying. Each crisis fed the other. Each problem made the other worse. A hopeless spiral, no way out. And finally, people made the only logical decision. They left. But before we continue with the final chapters of Maya collapse, we need to pause and look at something most histories overlook. Because while we've talked about cities, kings and monuments, we haven't yet heard from the most important witnesses, the common people themselves. Modern bioarchaeology, the study of ancient human remains, has given us an intimate, heartbreaking window into the final generations of classic Maya civilization. And what these bones tell us is deeply personal. Let me take you to a burial ground, excavated near Tikal, dating to around AD 830 to 850. This is the heart of the collapse period. The archaeologists expected to find the usual array of burials, some rich, some poor, the normal stratification of Maya society. What they found instead shocked them. Almost every skeleton showed signs of malnutrition, not just mild deficiency, but severe chronic undernourishment spanning years. How can we tell? Let me explain. When a child is growing, their bones and teeth develop in regular patterns, but when they experience periods of starvation or severe illness, this growth pauses. It leaves a mark. Literally, lines appear in the tooth enamel, called enamel hypoplasia. Bands appear in the long bones. These are called stress markers, and they're as clear as tree rings. In the skeletons from this collapse period cemetery, nearly every individual, adults and children alike, had multiple stress markers, not one episode but several, repeated periods of hunger throughout their lives. One skeleton particularly haunted the research team. A young woman, approximately 19 to 22 years old at death. Let's call her Ixchel. Ixchel's bones told a tragic story. Her first stress markers appeared around age 4. A childhood famine, another set around age 9, another hungry period. The most severe set around age 15-17. The teenage years of the Great Drought. Her adult teeth showed extreme wear. She'd been eating increasingly rough, poor-quality food, perhaps grinding up seeds, roots, anything to survive. Her bones showed evidence of anemia, iron deficiency from inadequate diet, and finally the cause of death appeared to be related to childbirth complications, complicated by her severely weakened state. Ixchel was buried in a simple grave. No rich offerings, no jade ornaments, just a single clay bowl, and her infant who had also died. But here's what's truly haunting. This wasn't unusual. This was typical. Cemetery after cemetery from the collapse period tells the same story. The bones reveal something else too. Increasing violence. In earlier periods around AD 600-700, the percentage of skeletons showing trauma, broken bones, healed wounds, skull fractures was relatively low, about 5 to 8%. But in the collapse period cemeteries, this spikes. At some sites, 20-30% of adult males show evidence of violent trauma, skull fractures from club blows, broken forearms from defensive wounds, cut marks on bones, and something even more disturbing, mass graves. Near the site of Aguateca, archaeologists found a pit containing 31 individuals, men, women, and children, all killed at approximately the same time. Some with obsidian blade cuts to the neck, some with crushed skulls. These were not captive warriors being sacrificed in ritual. These were ordinary people, families killed in what appears to be a massacre. The bones show they weren't well fed even before death. They were already stressed, already suffering. This is the collapse from the ground level, not the view from the palace, but the view from the common household. And here's another revelation from the bones: migration patterns. By analyzing isotopes in tooth enamel, scientists can tell where someone grew up. Different regions have different isotopic signatures in their water. This signature gets locked into your teeth as they form in childhood. So by analyzing adult skeletons, we can tell if they died where they were born or if they moved. In the collapse period, we see a dramatic increase in foreign individuals in cemetery populations, people born elsewhere, who migrated in. At some northern sites like Uxmal and Chichen Itza, up to 40% of burials from this period were migrants from the south. They were climate refugees, fleeing the epicenter of the drought, seeking anywhere that still had water, still had food. But here's the tragic part. Many of these migrant skeletons show they didn't survive long in their new homes. The stress markers continue right up to death. They escaped one dying city only to struggle in another. The bones also reveal adaptation attempts. Dietary analysis shows that as the collapse progressed, Maya diet drastically changed. Earlier periods show a diet rich in corn, supplemented with beans, squash, meat from hunting, and fish. Collapse period skeletons show increasing reliance on whatever was available, more wild plant foods, more consumption of very young animals, suggesting overhunting of game populations, evidence of eating plants that require extensive processing to be edible, desperation foods. At some sites there's even evidence of scurvy vitamin C deficiency, suggesting that people were no longer able to access the variety of fresh foods they needed. Let me tell you about one more discovery that brings this all painfully into focus. In a household excavation at the site of Sebel, archaeologists found what they call the last meal. The house had been abandoned suddenly. On the floor was a cooking pot, still containing carbonized remains of its last contents. Analysis showed it was a thin gruel made mostly of water and a small amount of ground seeds from a wild grass, not corn. This was poverty food, survival food. Nearby were the scattered remains of what had been the family's possessions. A few broken pots, some worn-out grinding stones, a single obsidian blade that had been resharpened so many times it was almost too small to use. No jade, no fine pottery, no imported goods. This family had already sold or traded everything of value, and then they left. That thin gruel was their last meal in this house, in this city. Then they took what little they could carry and walked away into the forest. Multiply this scene by thousands, tens of thousands, each family making the same desperate calculation. We can't survive here anymore. The bones don't lie. They tell us that the Maya collapse wasn't just a political or environmental event. It was a human catastrophe, a slow-motion tragedy playing out in household after household, family after family. Children watching their parents grow thin and weak. Parents watching their children's bellies swell with hunger. Grandparents telling stories of a time when the rains came and the corn grew tall and there was enough for everyone. And then, one by one, the decision to leave, to abandon the homes of their ancestors, to turn their backs on the great pyramids that had stood for centuries, to walk away from everything they knew. The bones tell us this truth. The Maya collapse happened one person at a time, one death at a time, one abandoned household at a time. And this brings us to a profound question that the bones force us to confront. In the face of slow collapse, when do you leave? When do you hold on hoping things will get better? When do you finally accept that the place you love, the home of your ancestors, has become unlivable? This isn't just an ancient question, it's a modern one too. Now we need to talk about something that archaeological evidence reveals with chilling clarity. What happened to Maya religion during the collapse? Because this wasn't just a political or environmental crisis, it was a spiritual apocalypse. Remember, the entire Maya worldview was built on a cosmic covenant. The king mediates with the gods. The gods send rain and blessings. The people prosper. This had worked for centuries, but what happens when it stops working? When the rituals fail? When the gods fall silent? The archaeological evidence of this crisis is written in stone. Literally, let me take you to a remarkable discovery at the site of Caracol in Belize. Here, archaeologists found a stellar monument 24 that dates to AD 849, right in the heart of the collapse. The carving is of much poorer quality than earlier monuments. The glyphs are cruder, the king's portrait less refined. This alone tells us something. The master craftsmen are gone or dying, but it's the text that's truly revealing. The inscription describes a ritual performed by the king. He's making offerings to the rain god Chark, but the text has an unusual, almost desperate tone. It emphasizes repeatedly that the king is following all the proper procedures, making all the correct offerings. It's as if the king is defending himself. "I'm doing everything right. Why isn't it working?" And then the monument abruptly stops. The carving is incomplete. The dedication ritual described in the text was apparently never finished. Did the king die before it could be completed? Did the city run out of resources to finish it? Did people simply give up halfway through? We'll never know. But that incomplete monument, standing there for 1200 years, seems like a frozen moment of crisis. A ritual interrupted, a prayer left unfinished. Other sites show even more disturbing evidence. At Piedras Negras, the final monuments show a dramatic shift in imagery. Earlier stelae showed kings confidently performing rituals, surrounded by bound captives, demonstrating their power and the favor of the gods. The final stelae show kings alone, no captives, no attendants, just the king, performing the bloodletting ritual in isolation. One art historian described it as the loneliness of failed power, the king going through the motions, but the divine connection has been severed. At Copan, something even stranger happened. The famous hieroglyphic stairway, the longest Maya text ever created, chronicling the dynasty's entire history, was built in AD 755. It was a monumental statement of permanence, of eternal kingship. But within 50 years, the dynasty was finished. The last king, Ugituk, tried desperately to maintain traditions. He commissioned monuments, performed rituals, followed all the old protocols, and then he simply disappears from the record. No death monument, no burial we found, just silence. Recent excavations in the residential areas of Copan revealed something that helps explain this silence. In the abandoned houses of the elite neighborhoods, archaeologists found deliberate desecration of religious objects, incense burners smashed, figurines of gods broken, sacred vessels shattered and scattered. This wasn't looting. Looters would have taken valuable items. This was destruction, rage. Someone, perhaps the starving common people, perhaps the elites themselves in their disillusionment, taking out their fury on the sacred objects that had failed them. You promised us rain. You promised us prosperity. You lied. At Tikal, excavations in the final occupation layers revealed something both bizarre and heartbreaking. Innovation in desperation. The traditional rain rituals weren't working, so people started trying new things. Archaeological evidence shows the introduction of ritual practices from other regions. Borrowed gods, borrowed prayers, borrowed ceremonies. It's like they were saying, our gods have abandoned us. Maybe your gods will listen. In one palace room, archaeologists found a cache of objects that didn't belong together. Traditional Maya incense burners alongside vessels in Mexican style, mixed with what appear to be ritual objects from the Gulf Coast region. A religious hodgepodge. A desperate attempt to try anything. Call on any divine power that might help. There's evidence of increased human sacrifice during this period too. Not just the traditional sacrifice of highborn captives, but something more frantic and widespread. At several sites, mass burial pits from the collapse period contain the bodies of children and young people with clear signs of ritual killing. Their deaths weren't part of traditional ceremonies, these were emergency offerings. The gods want more blood, more sacrifice. Maybe then they'll send rain. But of course it didn't work. One of the most poignant discoveries comes from a cave near the site of Dos Pilars. Deep in this cave, accessible only by crawling through narrow passages, archaeologists found an offering chamber, dated to around AD 835. The chamber contained dozens of broken pottery vessels, incense burners, and thousands of shells and beads. Clearly valuable offerings, but the arrangement was chaotic, desperate, not following the traditional careful placement of offerings. And on the cave wall, someone had scratched a glyph. It's difficult to read, but the best translation is something like, "Lord of the sky, why do you not hear us?" It's not an official monument, not a king's proclamation. It's graffiti, perhaps scratched by a priest who had crawled into this cave on a last desperate pilgrimage. A prayer scratched in the dark. A question that would never be answered. Think about what this means psychologically, spiritually. For centuries, literally hundreds of years, the Maya religious system had worked, perform the rituals correctly, make the offerings, and the cosmic order is maintained. The rains come, life continues. This wasn't superstition to them. This was observed fact. Generation after generation had seen it work. And then it stopped. Imagine being a priest who has spent his entire life mastering the sacred calendar, learning the complex rituals, studying the movements of the stars. Your father was a priest. Your grandfather was a priest. You've performed the rain ceremony exactly as it was taught to you, exactly as it's been done for centuries. And the rain doesn't come. You perform it again. You're more careful this time, more precise. You fast longer, you shed more blood, still no rain. You consult the calendar. Maybe you got the timing wrong. You check the astronomical alignments. Maybe you need to wait for Venus. You perform the ritual again, and again, and again. The rain still doesn't come. At what point do you begin to doubt? At what point do you wonder if the gods have abandoned you? At what point do you start to question everything you've ever believed? This is the spiritual catastrophe at the heart of the Maya collapse. It wasn't just that people were hungry, it's that the entire framework that gave meaning to their suffering had shattered. In traditional Maya thought, suffering had purpose, sacrifice had meaning. If you did your part, if the king did his part, the cosmos would respond. But now the cosmos was silent. The gods seemed absent or indifferent. The sacred covenant was broken. And without that framework, without that meaning, what was left? Just hunger, just violence, just suffering without purpose. Some people responded by intensifying their religious devotion, hence the desperate new rituals, the increased sacrifices, the borrowed gods. Some people responded by abandoning religion altogether, hence the smashed idols, the desecrated shrines, and some people simply stopped believing that the old order could be restored. They took what was left of their families and walked away. The last priests eventually died or left. The temples fell silent, the incense fires went out, and the gods, if they were listening, made no sign. This is perhaps the most profoundly tragic aspect of the Maya collapse. It was also a collapse of meaning, of faith, of the sacred story that had held society together. The monuments fell silent, not just because there were no sculptors left to carve them. They fell silent because there was nothing left to say. The cosmic covenant was broken, and there was no renewal. There's one group whose story particularly needs to be told. the children who grew up during the collapse, an entire generation born into decline, who never knew the prosperous world their grandparents had lived in. Archaeological evidence allows us to reconstruct what life was like for these children in remarkable detail, and it's heartbreaking. Let's imagine a child born in Tikal, around AD 820. We'll call him Balaam Jaguar. In Maya, Balaam's grandparents remember the golden days. They tell stories of great ceremonies with thousands of participants, of markets overflowing with goods from distant lands, of temples being built that reach toward the sky. But Balaam has never seen any of this. His earliest memories are of hunger, not starvation, not yet, but the constant gnawing hunger of never quite having enough to eat. The bone analysis of children from this generation shows stunted growth. They were significantly shorter and lighter than children from a century earlier. Chronic malnutrition during crucial developmental years left its mark. Balaam's father is a farmer, trying to coax crops from increasingly depleted soil. Some years are better than others, but the overall trend is decline. When Balaam is 6 years old, his younger sister dies. No dramatic cause, just a fever that she's too weak to fight off. Malnutrition makes children vulnerable to diseases that would have been survivable in better times. The burial is simple. Once, even a commoner's child would have been buried with toys, with offerings for the afterlife. Balaam's sister is buried with a single clay bowl. That's all the family can spare. By the time Balaam is 10, things have gotten noticeably worse. The reservoir that has always provided water to his neighborhood is only half full now, even in what should be the rainy season. Some of the grand houses in the center of the city stand empty now. The noble families have left where? No one knows, or they've died out. The palace area is quieter, fewer ceremonies, less grandeur. Balaam's education, which would traditionally have been informal, learning farming and crafts from his father, is disrupted by constant crisis. His father is often away, either conscripted for emergency construction projects, trying to improve water storage, or guarding against raids from rival cities. When Balaam is 12, warfare comes close to home for the first time. A hostile force from a neighboring city attacks. The raid is brutal and quick. They're not trying to capture elites for ritual sacrifice. That old tradition has broken down. They're just taking whatever resources they can. Stored corn, tools, even people to enslave. Balaam's neighborhood escapes the worst of it, but he sees the aftermath. Houses burned, people killed. Archaeological evidence from Tikal shows that during this period, commoner residences started to be fortified. Families built walls, blocked up doorways, except for one easily defended entrance. Homes became fortresses. This is what Balaam's childhood looks like. Constant fear, constant scarcity. The traditional coming-of-age rituals are abbreviated or skipped entirely. There's no time, no resources, no social fabric to support them. When Balaam is 15, his father makes a decision. They're leaving. It's not a sudden choice. It's the culmination of years of calculation, each season a little worse than the last. The water level dropping, the harvests failing, the violence increasing. One night, Balaam's father calls the family together. His mother Balaam, his 2 surviving siblings. "We can't stay," his father says. "There's nothing left here. Your grandparents are dead. This city is dying. We have to go while we still have the strength to travel." "Where will we go?" Balaam asks. "North," his father says. "I've heard there are cities in the northern lowlands that still have water, still have food. Maybe they'll accept us." "This is our home," Balaam's mother protests. "Our ancestors are here, the spirits of our grandparents. Our grandparents would want their grandchildren to live." His father interrupts gently. We'll carry their memory with us. So they prepare. They gather what little they have. A few pots, some tools, seeds, dried food. Not much, just what they can carry. The night they leave, Balaam looks back at Tikal one last time. The massive pyramids are dark silhouettes against the stars. Once they were bright white, visible for miles. The pride of the city, now they're just dark shapes. Silent, empty. Balaam will never see them again. The journey north is brutal. Balaam's family is not alone. The paths through the forest are crowded with other refugees. Other families who have made the same calculation, the same desperate choice. Some don't make it. There's not enough food, not enough water. The old and the very young are especially vulnerable. Balaam survives. He's tough, hardened by years of scarcity, but he arrives in the northern city of Uxmal thin, exhausted, traumatized, and Uxmal, while better than Tikal, is not the paradise he'd hoped for. The city is crowded with refugees. The local population views the newcomers with suspicion and hostility. More mouths to feed, more competition for resources. Balaam becomes part of a displaced underclass. No land rights, no social standing. Scraping by on day labor, odd jobs, anything to survive. He will never achieve the status his grandparents had. He will never live in the prosperous, stable world they knew. Balaam and his generation are the lost children of the collapse, born into decline, robbed of their heritage, displaced from their homes. But here's what's important. Some of them survived. Balaam, or someone like him, lived, had children, adapted. The Maya didn't vanish, but an entire generation bore the scars, psychological and physical, of the collapse. Archaeological surveys of the northern cities show a demographic bulge in the late 9th and early 10th centuries. The refugees arrived, and while life was hard, while the trauma was real, they persisted. The bones of these refugees show something remarkable. Despite their stressed childhoods, those who survived into adulthood often lived relatively normal lifespans. The human body and spirit are remarkably resilient, but the cost was high. An entire generation's worth of cultural knowledge was lost or disrupted. Traditional crafts declined. Artistic traditions simplified or disappeared. The complex hieroglyphic writing system began to fade. With centers of learning abandoned, there were fewer and fewer people who could read and write the glyphs fluently. By Balaam's grandchildren's generation, the classic Maya world would be a distant memory, a legend, stories told by old people about a time when the great southern cities were full of life, when pyramids were white and gleaming, when the gods still answered prayers. Your great-great-grandfather came from Tikal. They would tell their children, one of the greatest cities that ever was. You should have seen it. What happened to it? The children would ask, and the old people would shake their heads. The rains stopped, the gods fell silent, and we had to leave. The children of the collapse carried the memory of catastrophe with them. It shaped Maya culture for generations afterward, a deep cultural trauma, a collective memory of how even the greatest civilizations can fall. But they also carried resilience, the knowledge that survival is possible, that you can lose everything and still continue. This too is part of the Maya story, not just the fall, but the survival, not just the leaving, but the continuing. Now let's turn to perhaps the most objective witnesses to the Maya collapse, the environment itself. Because while human accounts can be biased, while monuments can be propaganda, the Earth keeps an impartial record. Modern environmental science has given us extraordinary tools to read this record, and what it reveals is both more complex and more alarming than we initially thought. The first major breakthrough came in the 1990s, when scientists began systematic coring of lakes across the Maya region. Let me explain what lake sediment cores tell us. Every year, material settles to the bottom of a lake. Pollen from nearby plants, eroded soil, chemical precipitates. These accumulate layer by layer, like pages in a book. By extracting these cores, sometimes 10, 15, even 20 meters deep, scientists can read backwards through time, analyzing each layer. Lake Chichancanab in Mexico provided one of the most detailed records. The core extracted there spans over 2,000 years of Maya history. The layers from the classic Maya period AD 250 to 750 show something dramatic: massive spikes in erosion sediment. The amount of soil washing into the lake increases by a factor of 3 to 5 compared to pre-Maya levels. This confirms what we suspected from archaeology. Extensive deforestation was causing severe erosion, but the pollen record adds crucial detail. In the early layers, tree pollen, especially from rainforest species, dominates, but layer by layer this decreases. Grass pollen increases. Pollen from disturbed weedy species increases. We can literally watch the forest being cleared, year by year. At the peak of classic Maya civilization, around AD 750 to 800, the landscape around major cities was roughly 70 to 80% deforested. Imagine that, where there had been dense rainforest, now there were scattered patches of trees in a mosaic of fields and scrubland. But here's the crucial finding: this process wasn't uniform or inevitable. Some regions were much more heavily impacted than others. The Maya heartland, the area with the highest density of great cities, showed the most severe deforestation and erosion. Cities like Tikal, Copan, and Palenque had pushed their local environments to the breaking point, but areas on the periphery, with smaller populations, maintained more forest cover and showed less erosion. This suggests something important. The collapse was at least partially human-caused. The areas with the most intense human activity were the ones that collapsed first and most severely. Now let's talk about the climate evidence, because this is where the story gets even more complex. The same lake cores, analyzed for oxygen isotopes, reveal rainfall patterns. During evaporation, different isotopes of oxygen behave slightly differently, leaving a signature that tells us how much rain fell. Multiple studies from different lakes using different methods all converge on the same conclusion. Between AD 750 and 950, the Maya region experienced the most severe drought in millennia. But it wasn't one long drought. It was a series of droughts, with brief recovery periods, which might actually be worse. Imagine, a severe drought hits, 5 years of low rainfall, harvests fail, stores are depleted, population drops, then a few good years. Rain returns. People think, it's over, we survived. They try to rebuild, then another drought hits, even more severe, lasting even longer. This cycle: drought, brief recovery, worse drought happened multiple times during the collapse period. For a society already stressed by overpopulation and environmental degradation, this was catastrophic. But here's the really sophisticated part of the environmental science. We can now identify the specific years of worst drought with remarkable precision. The cave formations I mentioned earlier, stalactites and stalagmites, grow in thin layers, like tree rings, but these layers can be dated extremely precisely using uranium-thorium dating. And the oxygen isotope ratios in each layer tell us the rainfall that year. Studies of these cave formations have identified several Megadrought events, AD 8-10, 8 Tomti, an even more severe drought, about 10 years, AD 8-10, an even more severe drought, about 10 years, AD 850, the worst drought of all, lasting roughly 20 years, AD 900. Now correlate these dates with the archaeological record. The final dated monuments, the abandonment of cities, And the match is stunning. Köppen's last dated monument, AD 8020, right after the second Megadrought. Tikal's last dated monument, AD 8069, right in the middle of the worst Megadrought. The environmental data and the archaeological data tell the same story. But there's more. Soil scientists have analyzed the agricultural terraces built by the Maya. These terraces were engineering marvels, carefully constructed to prevent erosion and maximize productivity. Core samples from these terraces show an interesting pattern. In the early Classic period, the soil in the terraces is rich and productive, but over time it deteriorates. By the late Classic period, the terrace soils show severe nutrient depletion, especially of nitrogen and phosphorus, key nutrients for corn growth. The Maya had been farming the same terraces for centuries. Without adequate fallow periods or fertilization, the soil was exhausted. Even if rain had come, the depleted soil might not have supported good harvests. Environmental scientists have also studied the cenotes, those deep sinkholes that were the Maya's main source of water in many areas. Analysis of sediment at the bottom of cenotes shows something alarming. As the drought progressed, water levels in the cenotes dropped dramatically, sometimes by 10 or more meters, for a city dependent on a cenote for water. This would have been terrifying. The sacred well, the source of life, slowly drying up. And here's a grim finding. Some cenotes show evidence of desperate last measures, ropes and bucket systems installed at increasingly deep levels as the water receded, people trying to extract water from deeper and deeper in the well, until finally it ran dry completely. Another environmental record comes from an unexpected source, coral. The coastal Maya cities engaged in extensive trade with inland cities, including trade in marine products. Coral that grew offshore during the Maya period has been analyzed for oxygen isotopes. These coral records confirm the drought patterns seen in lakes and caves, but they add an additional detail. Sea surface temperatures in the Caribbean were anomalously warm during the collapse period. This warm water would have meant less evaporation, less moisture carried inland, less rain. The drought wasn't just bad luck, it was driven by a fundamental shift in regional climate. Bringing all this environmental data together, here's what happened. For centuries, the Maya had been stressing their environment, clearing forests, depleting soils, overexploiting water sources. But things remained stable enough because rainfall was adequate. Then climate shifted. The natural variability of the climate system tipped into a severe drought phase. This would have been challenging even for a society with an intact environment and low population density. But the Maya were already at their maximum carrying capacity. They'd removed the environmental buffers that might have helped them weather the drought. Forest normally acts as a sponge, holding moisture and releasing it slowly. The Maya had removed most of the forest. Healthy soil normally retains water and nutrients. The Maya's soil was depleted. Natural water reservoirs normally refill during good years. But the Maya's reservoirs were overexploited and silt-clogged from erosion. When the drought hit, they had no reserves, no slack in the system, no margin for error. It was a perfect storm. Human-caused environmental degradation met with natural climate change. Neither alone might have been sufficient to cause collapse. Together they were catastrophic. And here's the sobering lesson. The environmental damage persisted long after the Maya left. Lake cores show that it took over 500 years, half a millennium, for the forest to fully recover, for tree pollen levels to return to pre-Maya levels, for erosion to slow, for the land to heal. The Maya stressed their environment beyond its ability to quickly recover. The scars they left on the landscape endured for generations. This environmental testimony is perhaps the most relevant lesson for us today. Because we see the same pattern: human activity stressing the environment, natural climate variability, and the catastrophic interaction between the two. The Earth keeps records, and those records warn us. There's one dimension of the Maya collapse that rarely gets the attention it deserves, perhaps because it's invisible in the archaeological record. I'm talking about the loss of intellectual capital, the disappearance of accumulated knowledge that had been built up over centuries. Think about what the classic Maya knew. They had mapped the movements of Venus with such precision that their calculations were accurate to within hours over a 500-year period. That's better than most European astronomical observations would be for another 700 years. They had developed sophisticated agricultural techniques for dozens of different microclimates: what to plant where, when to plant it, how to rotate crops, how to build terraces in different soil types. They had medical knowledge: which plants treated which ailments, how to set bones, how to perform dental work. Yes, Maya dentistry was remarkably advanced. How to treat wounds. They knew engineering: how to build massive structures without metal tools, how to create water management systems, how to make concrete that has lasted 1500 years. They had developed advanced mathematics capable of calculating with numbers in the millions, and they had encoded much of this knowledge in their writing system, in bark paper books called codices, in inscriptions on monuments, in oral traditions passed from master to apprentice. The collapse destroyed most of this. Here's what happened. The bark paper codices required special skills to create. Master scribes needed years of training to learn the complex glyphic system. These scribes were supported by the elite classes, who commissioned books for calendrical, astronomical, and ritual purposes. As cities collapsed and elite patronage disappeared, the production of codices stopped, and the existing codices, made of organic materials, decayed in the tropical climate. Of the thousands of Maya books that must have existed, only 4 survived to the present day. 4 out of thousands. When the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, they found that the remaining Maya peoples still had books, and the Spanish systematically destroyed them as pagan works. Bishop Diego de Landa, in a particularly zealous moment in 1562, collected and burned dozens of Maya books in a single auto da fe. "We found a large number of books," he wrote, "and as they contained nothing in which there were not to be seen superstition and lies of the devil, we burned them all. The knowledge in those books, astronomical calculations, historical records, medical texts, ritual instructions, went up in smoke." But the loss of knowledge began much earlier, during the collapse itself. Complex knowledge requires institutional support. An astronomer priest needed years of training. During that training, he had to be fed, housed, supported. He needed teachers who had also spent years mastering the knowledge. He needed access to observational instruments, to records, to calculation tools. When cities collapsed, this institutional framework disappeared. The specialized knowledge was held by a small number of experts. When those experts died without being able to fully train successors, the knowledge died with them. Let me give you a specific example. The long count calendar. This was an extraordinarily sophisticated system for marking absolute dates. It allowed the Maya to precisely date events hundreds of years in the past or future, but it was complex. Calculating dates in the long count required deep understanding of multiple interlocking calendar systems and advanced mathematics. During the Classic period, every major city had scribes who could work with the long count. Monuments everywhere were dated using it. After the collapse, this system was abandoned. The last long count date anywhere in the Maya world is AD 909. By the time the Spanish arrived, no living Maya person knew how to use the long count. The knowledge was gone. It took modern scholars over a century to figure out how the system worked and how to correlate it with our calendar. Think about what was lost in other domains. Agricultural knowledge. The Maya had developed specific techniques for cultivation in different areas. Which varieties of corn grew best in which soils? How to manage specific landscapes. Much of this was local knowledge, passed down through generations of farmers. When populations crashed and migrated, much of this place-specific knowledge was lost. Architectural knowledge. How to quarry specific types of stone. How to make certain types of lime plaster. How to carve stone with such precision without metal tools. In the post-collapse period, architecture became simpler, cruder. The techniques had been forgotten. Medical knowledge. Which plants treated which diseases. How to prepare them. The accumulated observations of generations of healers. Some of this survived in oral tradition, but much was lost. Historical knowledge. The detailed dynastic histories, the genealogies, the records of alliances and conflicts. After the collapse, much of classic Maya history became legend, then myth, then was forgotten entirely. When archaeologists finally learned to read Maya inscriptions in the 20th century, they were literally rediscovering history that had been lost for 1,000 years. There's a profound tragedy here that's hard to articulate. Imagine being one of the last astronomer priests at Tikal. You've spent your life mastering the calendars, learning to predict eclipses, maintaining the observations that stretch back centuries. You know that this knowledge is precious, that it took generations to accumulate, but your students have left Bong North or dead from hunger. Your library is abandoned. The paper books are starting to mold in the empty rooms. You're old now, and you realize when you die, all this will die with you. The intricate understanding of Venus's cycles, the calendar correction factors, the eclipse prediction methods, the historical records, all of it vanishing like smoke. What do you do? Do you try to write it down, knowing there may be no one left to read it? Do you perform the observations one more time, out of habit, out of devotion, even though no one cares anymore? This happened not once but hundreds of times. As civilization collapsed, each specialized knowledge holder, each master craftsperson, each keeper of traditions, dying alone, taking their knowledge with them. This is the invisible tragedy of collapse, not just the loss of life, but the loss of knowledge, not just the death of people, but the death of ideas, techniques, understanding accumulated over centuries. And here's the thing, knowledge loss can persist long after physical recovery. The Maya civilization did eventually recover in the north. Cities like Chichen Itza and Mayapan became major centers, but they never regained the intellectual heights of the classic period. The writing system simplified. The astronomical observations became less precise. The architecture, while still impressive, never matched the sophistication of classic period work. You can't just pick up where you left off after a dark age. Knowledge, once lost, is extraordinarily hard to recover. The Greeks lost much knowledge during their Dark Age after the Bronze Age collapse. It took them centuries to regain even a portion of it. Medieval Europe lost much classical knowledge when Rome fell. It took over 1,000 years to recover it, and much was only recovered by relearning it from the Arab world, who had preserved it. Knowledge is fragile. It exists in human minds and in transmission between minds. Break that chain of transmission, and it vanishes. This is perhaps the most relevant lesson for our own age. We live in an era of unprecedented knowledge accumulation. The sum total of human knowledge is greater now than at any point in history. But how fragile is it? Much of our knowledge is now digital, stored in formats that require functioning technological infrastructure to access. If that infrastructure failed, how much would be recoverable? How much knowledge is held by small numbers of specialists? If those fields were disrupted, how quickly would knowledge be lost? We like to think of progress as inevitable, knowledge as permanent. The Maya collapse reminds us it's not. Civilization is not just buildings and cities. It's the accumulated knowledge in human minds and in the systems that transmit that knowledge. When civilization fails, it's not just the present that's lost. It's the past too, and potentially the future. The silent cities hold not just abandoned buildings, but abandoned knowledge. Libraries burned not by invaders, but by neglect, wisdom scattered to the wind. In the end, perhaps the greatest loss of the Maya collapse was not what fell, but what was forgotten. The Maya collapse was not a single great catastrophe. It was not a single devastating event. It was a slow, silent, sorrowful fading. The great cities were not burned by enemy armies. They were not conquered. They simply emptied. Over approximately 150 years, for generations, people who had lived in these cities made a desperate choice. They left. Imagine the story of one family. The grandfather lives in Tikal. He grew up in the shadow of the pyramids. His father lived here. His grandfather lived here. His family's graves are here. The spirits of his ancestors are here. He has a small plot of land. Every year he plants corn. He pays tribute to the king, but now everything has changed. The rains haven't come. The corn hasn't grown. His children are hungry. His wife is sick. He couldn't pay tribute to the king. He was punished. There's war with a neighboring city. His son was drafted. He didn't return. The reservoirs have dried up. There's no water left. And the king, he's still performing rituals at the top of the pyramid. But there's no rain. Nothing is changing. One night, the grandfather gathers his family. They take the few belongings they have left, an old pot, an obsidian knife, a blanket, and in the darkness of night silently they turn their backs on the stone temples and walk toward the forest. Maybe they'll go north. Maybe there's rain there. Maybe they'll scatter into the depths of the forest. They'll find a small plot of land. They'll live a simple life. But they won't return to Tikal. Never. This story repeated thousands of times, tens of thousands of times, each family making the same desperate calculation. We can no longer survive here. Every night a few more people left. Every month the population decreased. The first to leave were ordinary people, farmers, craftsmen, merchants. Then nobles began to leave, priests, high-ranking officials. Finally, only the kings and their families remained, in empty plazas, in ghost cities. For a while in some cities, a strange thing happened. Ordinary people occupied the empty palaces. They lit crude fires in the luxurious rooms of kings. They cooked meals on the fine plastered floors. But eventually, they too left. Hunger, drought, hopelessness drove everyone away. And when the last person left, the city became completely silent. And then the forest came back, slow but determined, patiently. First year wind brought seeds. They fell into cracks in the plazas. Small plants sprouted. 5 years. Shrubs grew. Plastered surfaces began to crack. 10 years. Small trees rose, their roots wrapped around stone blocks. 50 years. Large trees emerged from the sides of the pyramids. Their branches passed through temple windows. 100 years. A green blanket wrapped everything. Pyramids began to resemble green hills. 300 years. Tree roots toppled pyramids. They shattered staircases. They overturned stelae. 1,000 years. The city completely disappeared. The forest swallowed it. Imagine the change in sounds. Before, the voices of thousands of people, bargaining in markets, children's laughter, priests' chants, workers at construction sites, the roar of spectators at ball courts. After silence, only the rustle of wind in the leaves, the singing of birds, the howling of monkeys, the buzzing of insects. Human sounds gave way to nature's sounds. For 1,000 years it would remain this way. The silent cities would sleep in the heart of the forest. Their history was forgotten. Their science was forgotten. Their art was forgotten. Only vague memories remained in the oral traditions of local people. Yes, there are old stones there. Our ancestors made them, but we don't know how. To the rest of the world, it was as if the Maya had never existed, until 1839, when Stevens and Catherwood stumbled upon them, and the wheel turned again. The lost cities were found again. Their history was read again, but this time differently. This time they weren't just forgotten. This time lessons were learned. For centuries, Maya glyphs remained a deep secret. Even after Stevens and Catherwood's discoveries, these complex symbols could not be understood. The prevailing view was this: these are not a real writing system, just mystical symbols, religious images, decorations. The strongest defender of this view was Sir Eric Thompson, British archaeologist, very influential, very respected, and he firmly believed Maya glyphs are unreadable. They don't tell stories, they only record time and symbolize gods. For decades, no one could challenge this view. The Maya remained silent. But then, from the most unexpected place, a crack formed. Post-war Leningrad, Soviet Union, a small government office, and a young linguist, Yuri Knorozov. Knorozov had no chance to visit Maya ruins. He couldn't go to Central America. It was the Cold War era. He only had a few books and reproductions of Maya texts, but he had a brilliant mind, and he realized this. These glyphs are not just pictures. They're phonetic. They represent the sounds of the spoken language. In the 1950s, he published his work. It was revolutionary. The reaction in the West: dismissal, mockery, rejection. Thompson was particularly harsh in his criticism. "What does a Russian linguist know about the Maya?" he said. "He's never even been to Mexico." Knorozov's brilliant work was ignored. The Maya's door remained closed, but the truth would come from a different path, from a different hero. Tatiana Proskoryakov, an architect and technical illustrator of Russian origin. As a child, she fled with her family from the Russian Revolution and settled in America. For years, she had been making reconstruction drawings of Maya cities, incredibly detailed, magnificent drawings. For this work, she had to study the stela meticulously for hours, and one day, while looking at the stelae at Piedras Negras, she noticed something. There was a repeating date pattern in a series of monuments. The dates spanned approximately a 60-80-year period, a human lifespan, the moment of insight. These are not planetary movements, these are human dates. First date must be birth. Next date must be accession to the throne. Last date must be death. The paper she published in 1960 dropped the bombshell. Maya stelae are royal biographies. This discovery changed everything. Thompson's dogma was shattered. Knorozov's phonetic approach was vindicated. Now that the glyphs told real histories, scientists began working frantically. Collaboration began. A new generation of researchers, Michael Coe, Linda Schoeller, David Stewart, and others, came together. Workshops were held. Conferences were organized. Every year more glyphs were deciphered. and one by one the names of Maya kings began to emerge from the stone. The great king of Palenque, Pakal, means shield. He remained on the throne for 80 years. The mighty ruler of Tikal, Jasar Chankawil, the greatest warrior king of the century. 18 Rabbit of Copan, famous for his bad luck. He was captured by a rival city and sacrificed. Not just names. Entire political histories emerged. Which king declared war on whom? Which princess married whom? Which alliance was formed? Which alliance was broken? Which city defeated which? The decipherment of Maya writing was one of the great intellectual achievements of the 20th century, and it completely changed our view of the Maya. Before, peaceful stargazers, mystical priests, now real people, ambitious kings, ruthless wars, complex politics. The silent cities could finally tell their own stories in their own words. And now we come to perhaps the most important point, because when most people hear about the Maya collapse, they think this: the Maya died, they vanished, they became history. Wrong. This is the greatest misunderstanding. Classic Maya civilization collapsed. Yes, the great cities in the south emptied. True, but the Maya people did not disappear. They survived. While the southern cities were emptying, a new era was beginning in the north. Cities like Chichen Itza on the Yucatan Peninsula began to flourish. Their culture changed, adapted, but continued. Chichen Itza built a magnificent city. The El Castillo Pyramid, the Temple of Warriors, the largest ball court in the Americas. They established trade networks, they controlled sea routes, they traded salt, honey, cotton, obsidian. They created a more resilient, more outward-looking economic system. They continued to thrive for centuries. Then the Spanish came. The 16th century, brutal conquest. But still, the Maya people persisted. Today, right now, more than 7 million Maya are living. In Mexico, in Guatemala, in Belize, in Honduras, in El Salvador. They are not the remnants of a lost civilization. They are a living, breathing people. More than 30 Maya languages are still spoken. Yucatec Maya, Kaiche, Kukchikel, Mam, Kaikchi. In the highlands of Guatemala, women still weave textiles on traditional looms. These fabrics carry complex patterns, ancient symbols. In Yucatan villages, some communities still perform old rituals. They blend their Catholic faith with reverence for forest and cornfield gods. Modern Maya identity is strong. Many Maya take pride in their ancestors' legacy. They fight to preserve their languages. They fight for land rights. And there are Maya guides working at archaeological sites. They tell visitors about their ancestors' cities. They can read the glyphs in their own languages. This is very important, friends. The Maya story is not an archaeological mystery of a lost civilization. This is living history, a powerful testament to a culture's ability to endure, adapt, and remember. Now let's step back and think. What does the Maya collapse teach us? First lesson: no civilization lasts forever. The Maya achieved incredible things. Writing, mathematics, astronomy, art, all at their peak. But this didn't protect them. It didn't make them invincible. Even the brightest civilizations are fragile. Second lesson: your relationship with the environment is vitally important. The Maya pushed their environment to its limits. They cut down forests, they depleted the soil, and this left them vulnerable. When the climate changed, they couldn't adapt. There was no margin for error left. Are we on a similar path today? We're cutting down forests. We're polluting the oceans. We're changing the climate. The Maya story is a warning. You cannot fight nature. You must live in balance with nature. Third lesson. Short-term competition can lead to long-term disaster. Maya kings competed with each other. Bigger pyramids, more magnificent temples. Each king wanted to say, "I am the greatest." But this architectural arms race led to the destruction of forests. Is there a similar dynamic today? Companies, countries competing with each other. Growth, 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 until resources are exhausted. Fourth lesson. Climate change can destroy civilizations. The Maya were successful for 1,000 years. Then the climate changed. The Megadrought began. They couldn't adapt because they were already too fragile. Today we're experiencing global climate change, much faster, much more comprehensive. The Maya didn't create it. It was a natural change, but it still destroyed them. We created climate change with our own hands. Will the consequences be more dire? Fifth lesson. System collapse can be rapid. For the Maya, the collapse took 150 years, fast by historical standards, but think from an individual perspective. A few generations. Your grandfather lived in a brilliant city. You're living in a half-empty city. Your grandson will live in the forest. How quickly could our modern society collapse? We've seen how quickly pandemics, economic crises spread. The Maya show us complex systems can unravel quickly. Sixth lesson. But adaptation and survival are possible. This is the most hopeful lesson. The Maya didn't disappear after the collapse. They adapted. They migrated to northern cities. They lived in smaller, sustainable communities. They preserved their culture. They preserved their languages. They preserved their identity. They're still here today. This shows us change is possible. Survival is possible. But we need to act early. We need to read the signals. We need to adapt. We've come to the end of our journey, friends. We started in the rainforests of Central America. From the mystery of silent cities, we discovered the Maya's golden age. We learned about their brilliant sciences, their magnificent arts, their complex societies. Then we investigated their fall. We examined the clues left in soil, in stone, in lake bottoms. We saw the escalating wars. We understood the environmental destruction. We felt the terror of the mega drought. And finally we grasped the perfect storm of collapse, the domino effect of interconnected crises. But we also saw resilience. We learned that Maya people are still here today. Now here we sit in the 21st century. We have modern technology. We have incredible scientific knowledge. But we face the same fundamental problems: growing population, declining resources, environmental degradation, climate change, competition and conflict. The Maya believed they were moving within the great repeating cycles of creation and destruction of the universe. Maybe they were right. Maybe history really does move in cycles. But here's the critical difference. We know the Maya's story. They couldn't learn from their own mistakes, but we can learn from their mistakes. The silent cities are sending us a message. They echo across time and space. Look at us. See how great we were. See how knowledgeable we were. See how powerful we were. And then look at what became of us. We collapsed. Our cities emptied. The forest swallowed us. Why? Because we exhausted our environment. Because we fought each other. Because when the climate changed, we couldn't adapt. Are you on the same path? This question is disturbing, but it's a question that needs to be asked, and the answer is in all our hands. Maya civilization didn't vanish. It transformed, it changed, it survived. Maybe our civilization must also transform, but if we act early, it can be a controlled transformation, a planned change. Or if we're too late, Maybe our cities will also one day fall silent. But I hope not. I hope we learn from the Mayas' story. I hope we learn to live in peace with our environment. I hope we learn to cooperate with each other. I hope we learn to adapt to a changing world. Because the silent cities are still there, in the forest, still waiting, still warning. And if we listen, if we learn, maybe our cities will never fall silent. Thank you so much for being with me on this long journey, friends. I hope the Maya story has impacted you too. I hope you've thought about it. If you enjoyed this content, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. And definitely write in the comments, which part was most interesting to you? What did you learn from the Maya story? I wish you all a calm and peaceful night. See you in the next video. In the depths of the forest, silent pyramids still rise. On stone stelae, ancient glyphs still shimmer. And if you listen carefully in the silence of the night, maybe you can hear the echoes from 1,000 years ago. Remember, learn, don't repeat. And perhaps the most hopeful part of the story, that the Maya people are still here, even 1,200 years later. Peaceful nights.